Above the beautiful clear sky of Athens, a Boeing 737 had been circling around for hours, completely in radio silence. Fear of terrorist attack, 2 F-16s were sent to intercept that aircraft. The fighter pilots reported that no one is moving, most still strapped in their seats, motionless, with yellow masks still attached on their faces. Except for one person, not a pilot, moving inside a cockpit. Minutes later, a plane descended rapidly and slammed into a mountain, killing all people on board. Who is that person? And why everyone inside simply pass out? Let's get into it. It's an early morning of August 14, 2005. 115 passengers and 6 crews boarded Helios Flight 522 at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. A flight's destination is Prague in Czech Republic, with a stopover in Athens, Greece. It was a summer holiday season in Europe, and most passengers were holidaymakers who will be getting off at Athens. The captain of a flight was highly experienced, a 59-year-old German with nearly 17,000 flight hours. He used to have flown with many airlines before joining Helios in 2005. The first officer is also very experienced, a 51-year-old Cypriot with over 7,500 flight hours. These pilots had flown together for many times, but the first officer seemed to dislike a captain for his overbearing and authoritarian attitude. The aircraft used on this flight is Olympia. She is a 7-year-old Boeing 737-300, registered as 5 Bravo Delta Bravo Yankee. First flew with German airline before joining Helios in 2004. The aircraft took off to the clear sky of Mediterranean Sea as normal. The pilots then contacted Nicosia ATC, requested a cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. The controller approved her request, and the aircraft continued climbing. Everything was normal until, as the plane reached 12,500 feet, however, an alarm sounded in a cockpit. The pilots were confused. This alarm should be sounded on the runway, not in the air. They turned off the autothrottle and reduced power. But the alarm continued. So they contacted Helios Operations Center, telling that they had a takeoff configuration warning and the overheating ventilation cooling system. He asked an engineer where the circuit breakers of these ventilations were. The engineer replied, "Behind your seat, Captain." After then, the communication ceased to exist. The Olympia is level off at 34,000 feet and now entering Greece's airspace. Any further attempts to contact a plane were found to be unsuccessful. At first, they thought the aircraft might experience a problem with radio, but as the aircraft had made no attempt to descend, the Athens controller contacted Greek Air Force, and they scrambled 2 F-16's fighter jets to intercept the aircraft. By this time, the Olympia is flying on the autopilot and had followed her flight path all the way to Athens at 34,000 feet. The plane is now making several holding pattern over Kia Island, near where Titanic's younger sister had sunk. During her 6th holding pattern, 2 F-16s finally caught up with Olympia. One F-16 gone to observe the aircraft, while another F-16 stayed behind a 737, ready to shot the aircraft down if they don't comply. The aircraft can be intercepted by military for several reasons, such as no communication for several minutes, and entering the restricted airspace. When they found a suspect, one fighter will fly around to make a visual contact, and another will stay behind at the rear of the aircraft. When you got intercepted, you must follow their instructions. If they want you to follow. They want you to turn here, do it. Or if they want to land here, you should. If you don't comply, well, they shot you down. Or if you show them no threat, they will leave you alone, and you may continue. Let's get back to our story. A F-16 on the left side of Olympia looking through the cockpit, and he saw the first officer still on his seat, face down, not moving, while the captain was missing. And when he looked into a cabin, he saw many passengers sitting motionless, with oxygen masks still on their face. At this point, you might wondering why all passengers face down despite having their oxygen masks on? Well, to be honest, the emergency oxygen can last only for just 12 to 15 minutes. Because when a rapid decompression occurred, the pilots will do an emergency descent to below 10,000 feet, where the air was breathable. In case of 522, however, no emergency descent was performed. So when oxygen ran out, they passed out. For the pilots, their oxygen masks were stored on the side of their seats, and they need to pick it up and wear it. The pilots of Helios 522 didn't put their mask on. Several minutes later, they passed out due to lack of oxygen, leaving no one controlling a plane. Because of this, the Olympia is now a ghost plane. During Olympia's 10 holding pattern, a fighter pilot saw a man in light blue shirt and dark vest entering and sit down on the captain's seat. A F-16 pilot was surprised. There was one person alive, conscious, still moving in a plane. This person is a 25-year-old Andreas Prodromo, the Olympia's sole male flight attendant. He was able to stay conscious with 3 portable oxygen stored in a cabin and able to get in a cockpit with emergency code that unlock a cockpit door. Apart from being flight attendant, he held UK commercial pilot license, meaning he's know how to fly a plane. The Olympia now had a new pilot, ready to bring her down safely to the ground. It's looked like problem solved, right? Well, it doesn't. A minute after Andreas sat on the captain's seat, a left engine flame out due to fuel starvation. He grabbed a yoke and turned sharply to the left, breaking out from the holding pattern. The F-16s continued following with Olympia, all the way down to 7,000 feet, where Andreas finally acknowledged them, and making a hand motion. The fighter pilot made a hand signal in return, ordered Andreas to follow them to the airport. Andreas acknowledged this, but couldn't follow, because the right engine had flame out, also from fuel starvation. The Olympia became a giant glider, and falling fast. Andreas knew how to fly a small planes, but doesn't know how to fly an aircraft like 737. But that doesn't matter. He must bring this plane to the airport now. He turns his plane to the southwest, towards the airport in Athens. Perhaps knowing situation is hopeless, he turns Olympia away from the capital. Moments later, at 12:04 p.m., Helios Flight 522 slammed into a hill northeast of Athens. All 121 people, including Andreas, are dead. It's a worst air accident in Greece's history. The investigation began immediately after the crash. At the same time they examined the wreckage, they interviewed an engineer who was on Olympia in a night before accident. He told that, on the day period to the accident, the Olympia was experienced a problem with right aft door. The ice had built up on the seal, and the hard bangs was heard during a flight. On that night, he and his colleague performed an inspection on that door and fixed a leak. Then, he performed a pressurization leak test on the aircraft. To do this, he switched the pressurization mode selector panel from auto to manual position. And when he finished a job, he forgot to switch it back to auto mode. On this mode, if the pilots didn't adjust it themselves, the air inside will become equal to the outside. Too thin for human to breathe normally. The pressure inside must be maintained at 8,000 feet or less, no matter if the plane was on 10,000 or 34,000 feet. Otherwise, a condition named hypoxia begins to strike. Hypoxia can lead to dizziness, headache, difficulty thinking, unconsciousness, and eventually death. How long the human remain conscious in low air situation, it depends how high they are. Going higher equal a low chance of survival. However, it shouldn't be fatal if pilots check and reset it during pre-flight, before taxi, and after takeoff. Shockingly, they didn't do it. When a plane reached an altitude of 12,000 feet, a cabin pressure warning alarm sounded in a cockpit. Coincidentally, this alarm sound was so familiar to takeoff configuration warning. There's nothing to tell it different, and when they performed a warning test, this sound came out. So they immediately recognized it as something related to takeoff, not with cabin pressure problem. The effects of hypoxia take over, leading to stress, fixation on a warning and overheating cooling fan, poor crew resource management, and not capable to identify a real problem. 6 minutes after contact at Helios Operations Center, both pilots felt unconscious, and all communication went dead. Everyone in a cabin might stay conscious with oxygen masks, but sooner or later, as when 15 minutes oxygen went empty, they too felt unconscious. Several recommendations were made to stop this accident from happening again. The flight crews were trained to identify a difference between takeoff configuration warning and cabin altitude warning. And verifying the bleed and pack system configuration after takeoff is a must. The engineers were told to always switch the pressurization mode selector back to auto mode when the test is finished. The indicators that tell the pilots if they had cabin altitude warning or takeoff warning must be installed on every new and retrofit aircrafts. When oxygen masks were dropped in a cabin, the cabin crews must report to the pilots immediately, and also to check if the pilots had donned their oxygen masks too. And finally, the practical hypoxia training has now become a part of flight crew and cabin crew training. Since the crash of Flight 522, not a single passenger jet suffered in a similar fate even since.